I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Join me on a quest to find awe and wonder in all creation, human or wild, vast or small, spiritual encounters that move us beyond words. It was the 1980s. A young teenager in India named Kartick Satyanarayan could not get enough of the outdoors, the wilds. And his parents didn't worry too much about where he went. Nowadays, we call this free-range parenting.
I was free range. I was a free range child. My parents didn't do any hovering or helicopter parenting at all. And I'd be out most of the time. I would bunk school. Of course, we had no cell phones, so I was very fortunate. My mom couldn't check up on me and where I was, and she couldn't track my movements. So I would say I'm, studying at my friend's house for the next few days. I'll see you 4 days from now. And me and another buddy of mine, we'd take bicycles and pedal off to the nearest forest. And there was this beautiful national park called the Bannerghatta National Park, about 15 miles from where we lived in Bangalore city. And so we'd pedal down there with just a small backpack and a couple of packets of noodles and a small utensil and a matchbox. That was it. And park our bicycles and then walk into the forest. And we had a great relationship with the forest authorities, the officers over there. So they'd be thrilled that somebody was even interested going in there.
Later, as a grown man, Kartick Satyanarayan would throw boundless energy into caring for wildlife, like these officials at the national park, who smiled on his childhood adventures. For his part in saving Indian sloth bears from abuse and captivity, he would come to be known as the Bear Man of India. More formally, he's co-founder and CEO of a conservation group called Wildlife SOS. Kartick Satyanarayan also happens to be a vivid storyteller. You won't soon forget him. In this episode of Constant Wonder, he tells story after story about the deep wonder for nature that has been his lodestar, guiding him onward in rescue and conservation work. But going back now to 14-year-old Kartick and his buddy Sandy in the deciduous forest of Bannerghatta National Park, it's a warm, humid place encompassing about 100 square miles and bordering on one of India's largest cities, Bangalore City, or Bengaluru.
And we'd hike in through the forest, another 6 kilometers or so. And we'd get there just before evening, about 5, 6 p.m. in the evening, as it's starting to get dusk. So we'd get to this place, which was this water hole in the middle of the forest, a beautiful water hole, surrounded by trees. You could see the hills in the backdrop. And just imagine, the sounds of the jungle. As it becomes evening, you have the jungle fowl calling. You hear the elephants trumpeting in the distance. This forest had wild elephants, tigers, leopards. In fact, even now there are 2 or 3 wild tigers over there, although it's becoming cut off and there's a lot of fragmentation because of the urbanized buildup. And as the evening changes and, it would start getting dark, we'd climb up onto a tree. We'd find a tree that's about 30 or 40 feet high, climb up and settle down on one of the branches. We'd be sitting there, we'd have some, snacks to sit and chew on. And then you just become very quiet. And the jungle actually talks to you. It's incredible how the sounds just change. And from the jungle fowl and the elephants trumpeting, you start hearing the nightjars calling. And the nightjars would call, then, of course, the wind would whistle, the light would change, then the crickets would start. And then the jungle falls silent. It becomes dark. It's pitch dark because although we would select full moon nights to go and do this hangout, it gets pitch dark because the moon is behind the hill. And then it's dark, and that's when your mind really plays tricks on you. You start seeing all these shadows. Oh, maybe that's a bear. Maybe that's a leopard. And you get really excited, and we're whispering to each other, hoping we don't fall off the tree in the excitement. A little bit later, the wind changes direction. So we would put our finger into our mouth, use the saliva and hold it up to see which direction the wind is blowing in. And so if it's going downwind and we were upwind, it was a problem. We didn't want the elephants or any of them to smell us sitting up here. And sometimes we'd even go to the extent of getting dried elephant dung and smear it on our jackets so that if the wind blew and the elephants would downwind and they would get our smell, they would only smell elephant dung. The moon would come up behind, rise above the hill, and then the entire waterhole would be bathed in the silvery white, shining, brilliant light. And we would actually see herds of elephants getting into the waterhole, splashing around. They wouldn't have a clue that we were there. Sometimes because of the dung that we had smeared on our jackets. Of course, we'd be stinking the next day, but it was a happy stink. We were thrilled. We were delighted. I mean, where else would you get to see a herd of wild elephants? And Asian elephants are very touchy. They're very protective of the young. But they were right there, barely a couple of 100 feet from us, bathing and frolicking in the water. And we'd see wild leopards coming in. A leopard is called sawing. So like your mountain lions, but they are yellow and black with black rosettes. And it is truly like a sawing. So we heard this call, and I can imitate this. Like someone is actually sawing wood. And you're like, what? Who's out here sawing wood? And then you spot a leopard right there calling out, and the mate is on the other side of the waterhole. And they call to each other. And then they come together, drink some water, and then head off into the forest. How magical can that be? I mean, that got me really hooked to wanting to protect, preserve this incredible wealth that we are losing very rapidly.
Up on that branch above the water hole, do you wait until the animals dissipate and go away, and then do you slink back home and sneak into your home? Or what happened that night? On those evenings, those nights? Did you stay all night?
Yes, we did. You stay up there. I mean, we were just so fascinated. So this goes on from about 6 p.m. I mean, I could actually put slots into the whole timeline of that night. When the elephants came, then the bears came, then we had mongoose, you had leopards, then you had wild boar. There was a noisy, big group of wild boar.
So the only safe creatures in this whole story are the nightjars. Everything else could kill you.
Yes, they could. But what I've learned, that's one thing that I learned very early on, that the most dangerous creature in the forest is people, not animals. Animals are not ever trying to kill you. As long as you let them know that you're there, they avoid you like the plague. I mean, I think they're 10,000 times more afraid of us than we are of them. There was one other time that the tree had a lot of red ants on it. And I mean, we would have been in deep trouble if we had climbed the tree that day. So for some reason, there was some red ant migration, so we didn't have a tree to sit on. So we had to sit on it's called the bund. The B-U-N-D, the bund of the waterhole. So where the waterhole actually has an embankment on the side. So we had to sit on the edge. There was a lot of lantana bushes. That was the only cover we had. It was a narrow path behind us. So there was a 5 feet wide path. The entire elephant herd walked there. And elephants, mind you, can surprisingly be very silent when you least expect them. A huge herd of elephants, they can make a racket when they want to. They can also be very silent when they want to. So they kind of literally tiptoed. And when we heard something and we both looked back, they were like 7 feet away from us, this whole herd. And they could have easily trampled us, killed us. So we just kind of settled down a little bit on the embankment. We were kind of hanging onto the sides of this embankment. And they trumpeted when they realized there were people here. And they just went away. They did a mock charge just to let you know that, okay, we know you're here. Don't try to approach us, or we can be dangerous. And, as long as you don't corner them, you don't put them in a bad spot, you don't make them feel that there's no way out, I think animals are pretty harmless. I've been so close. I've had close encounters with bears, leopards, tigers, elephants, crocodiles, snakes. I've never, ever had... I mean, yes, it has scared the hell out of me. I've had to sit down and wait till my heart got back into its place from my mouth. But I've never, ever been harmed, ever.
I think I'll just let Kartick be Kartick. And to protect my own hide, I'm going to continue giving wide berth to any moose or grizzlies in my neck of the woods. I'm not about to warm up to red ants either, so maybe we have that in common.
So we'd stay the whole night on the tree, and usually about 3:30 in the morning, everything goes quiet again, because a lot of the wildlife that's out there foraging for food, for water, etc., they all start heading back to their dens or resting places, and it gets very cold. By this time, you're shivering and freezing up on a tree. So two of us would look around and we hope that no one's there. I mean, no bears, leopards, tigers, etc. We'd make a little bit of a noise and scramble down as noisily as we could. We'd get down on the floor near the water hole, collect some of that muddy water, because by now we would have run out of drinking water, and then we'd light a little fire in the corner with some twigs, with a matchbox. Of course, it would take about 10 matches to finally strike one in that cold with your frozen hands. And then we'd heat up some of that muddy water, filter it through a piece of cloth, make some chai tea, drink a cup of tea, make some noodles, and then lie down over there on sleeping bags just by the tree and just snooze for a couple of hours. And then we'd spend the day just exploring the forest, looking at different places, and then do another night like that. So 2 or 3 nights for full moon, we would do this. And this friend of mine who used to do this a lot with me is today a board member in National Geographic. He works with them. He's an international wildlife filmmaker. We're still in good touch and we're very close.
You might think that this budding young naturalist would cut a straight path from those moonlit nights in the forest to a career working with wild animals, but that wasn't the case. He actually had what seemed like an insurmountable hurdle to clear first, as we're about to hear. I'm Marcus Smith for Constant Wonder, visiting with Kartick Satyanarayan. He is co-founder and CEO of Wildlife SOS. Kartick always scored high in science while growing up, but during his high school years, he hit a major snag, and it nearly prevented him from achieving his childhood career goal of working with animals.
I wanted to be a veterinary doctor who could help wildlife in distress. That was my dream. I had a great relationship with science, with botany and zoology. My relationship with chemistry was very difficult. It was not possible to approach any science academic work or further education without chemistry. So I said, fine, I'll find another way of achieving my goals. I'm going to take the next best opportunity, which was business management and commerce. I'm going to work with this and then create an institution by which I can hire the people needed. And so I had this opportunity when I was very young. I just started my course, my business management course, and New York Zoological Society. Today they're called the Wildlife Conservation Society. They had a project in India and they wanted to do some tiger ecological status surveys. So I'd applied to be a field biologist on the ground. There were 26 other candidates who were all postgraduate in science, forestry graduates and postgraduates. And I was like, oh, these people are way into that league. They're probably never going to select me. We got going. I was interviewed and they asked me, what are you going to do? What's your plan moving forward? And I said, well, I hope to create institutions that will help wildlife in distress, but also address conservation at a micro and a macro level. Working with communities, with forests, create ecological solutions that are practical, pragmatic, and inclusive. They thought it was a harebrained idea back then. But I'm glad to say that I'm doing exactly that. And that's what I've done for the last 30 years of my life. And so they said, well, after this, we have a field test. I said, well, even if I don't get selected, I would love to come for the field test. They said, yeah, you're included in that. Each of these candidates had to lead a team of people into the forest. And these are deep forests with wild elephants, tigers, leopards, you name it, you have that.
You were no stranger to this environment.
No, I was at home. I was absolutely at home in this environment. Everybody else was an academician there. So I was thrilled, okay? And even if they don't select me, I get 5 days in the jungle. So it's like a vacation. So when I was leading the group, I was asked, okay, what's that footprint in the ground? Whose scat is that? So there was a bit of poop over there in the jungle, and everybody else was taking a guess. I just pulled out 2 twigs nearby from the ground, and I opened it up and I saw small rodent jawbones inside that, and then I saw the hair, the follicles on it, and I said, well, this is probably a jackal's cat, and it's eaten rodents, and I can see the hair of the rodents, and probably we don't have rabbits in India in the wild. We have gray hares, black-naped hares, and rufous-tailed hares, and so that's what I saw in there. And then I correlated that with the tracks and the poop. You have these little pellets of rabbit-like pellets around there. And then further up, we saw a leaf on the ground, just a leaf. And it was a fresh green leaf. And so I was asked, why is a leaf on the ground? Why is it not up on the tree? So you pick up the leaf, and I looked at it, and I saw the serrated edges, which indicated the bite mark of a primate. So I said, well, this is a primate. And from the spacing of the bite, it looks like a langur. And I said the branch there also indicates that the langurs have been jumping. And I looked up, and I could see the troop of langurs was still not very far away. So I had a great time. I enjoyed my 5 days in the jungle doing all of this stuff. So there were 2 people selected out of 26 people who went for this field test. One was a forestry graduate, and one was me. And then they called me in, and they said, you're too young, you're doing commerce and business management. How are you even doing this? You're too young to be doing this. I said, I want to do this very badly. They said they wanted to talk to my parents. I was so embarrassed. My parents had no idea I had done all of this, by the way. They were completely gobsmacked when I went back and I said, well, Dad, Mom, I think I have to break some news to you. I have a small confession to make. And it was awkward. I had to tell them that. They said, what? You've gone and done all of this? You've done the interview? You didn't think it was okay to talk to us, but you've got college. You've got to do all this. I said, what if I can do... So my dad saw that, I was really crazy about this. And my mom was also fairly tolerant. And they'd already discovered that I had, snakes and birds and all kinds of things in my room sometimes. And so they said, well, you can do this if you can also do your college degree. I don't want you giving up on college for this. I was ready to give up on college to go to the jungle. I really was at that point. So my dad said, we don't have a problem. You go ahead and do this, but make sure you can do college alongside. I was like, okay.
Lucky for him, his parents didn't insist on any more chemistry. But even having gotten his parents' blessing, it turns out he wouldn't be allowed to pursue this dual path without permission from the college. His case got referred from his college principal, that's what we would call a dean here in the United States, to the university vice chancellor. But Kartick wasn't daunted by any of this.
I was hoping everything would open up like Moses had. That was my dream. I think the principal didn't think I would go to the vice chancellor, but I went. I pestered the vice chancellor until he said, all right, I think you can do this. I trust that you will not let us down. So I pursued my college degree from the jungle. I would come back 8 weeks before my exams. I would burn the midnight oil. Over there in the jungle, a lot of times in the forest, in these field stations, you have no electricity at all. So I would have a candle, and I would literally study with candlelight at night. Whole day I would work in the forest collecting scats, doing camera trap work, doing field surveys, transects and things like that. And then come back 8 weeks before my exams. And then I got through college too, so I did both of those together.
It was in 1993, during his teenage years as a university student, studying by night while doing field work in the jungle by day for the New York Wildlife Organization, that he stumbled one evening upon an illegal operation of what he calls the timber mafia. He and a local tribal assistant had been assigned to survey wildlife populations in a certain ecosystem in Nagarhole National Park in southern India. They had set out walking as quietly as possible so as not to spook any animals.
So you have grasslands, then you have a bamboo forest, then you have dry deciduous, you have moist evergreen, then you have rainforest. Any forest you pick, you have these small micro habitats within the forest. So you have every 100 meters, you have a small marker on those trees which show you where in the forest you are, what habitat you're in. And then you look for wildlife in that habitat. So whether it's a pig or a bear or a bison herd or an elephant, you mark that. So here you are, you're a young man, you're in the forest, you're enthusiastic, you're looking for wildlife, and you're doing this data collection. And suddenly, what did I see? First, I saw some movement further away down in a valley. And then I hear this hacking away of wood, like a big tree being hacked. And then I paused. I asked my assistant to also look. So we both started scanning the landscape with our binoculars. And we saw several of these large, these are trees that have been like a couple of 100 years old, huge teak trees. Now, teak is a very valuable form of wood and it's used for furniture and doors and all kinds of things. And so there were some of these teak trees that had been felled, but this was obviously a gang that was doing it, like a criminal gang that was running this little show. And they were glancing very furtively. They were scared someone who's going to come down and catch them. The enforcement was quite far away, but this was so deep in the forest that it would have been hard for them to find it. And they had bullock carts on which they would saw these up into smaller pieces and then slowly take them out so you wouldn't hear any jeeps. It wouldn't trigger off any sounds of vehicles going into the forest. And so that shocked me, and I was really upset by seeing this. Forests are the lifeline to people. We wouldn't exist if we didn't have forests. We wouldn't have any oxygen, we wouldn't have any water, and we would cease to exist as well. So now in hindsight, I think maybe I should have been a little more restrained in the way I dealt with the situation. But back then, I was a teenager. I had to kind of get down there and do what I could. And my tribal assistant, of course, told me, there are too many people. There are like 20 people. We can't do anything about it. And I said, but let's try. It was summer. When it was peak summer, what happens is that the whole forest is carpeted with leaves and they all become very dry. And it's also very crumply and crackly. It crackles constantly if you step on it. If you see someone running towards you, you would hear the sounds of them running on those dry leaves. So I said, okay, let's try this. We picked up a bunch of rocks and both me and my assistant together, we threw them in different directions. As these rocks bounded down on these dry leaves, it sounded like there were many people running down, and we ran down as well. And I screamed out loudly saying, get those people, don't let them escape, surround them, as if we were like a 30 people team. And those guys really got scared and they fluttered away like pigeons. Of course, we couldn't chase them all, but they just abandoned their tools, their gear, everything, and started running here and there, helter-skelter. There was one guy who was kind of floundering. He was not skilled with running through forest. Running through forest, dense forest, is a skill you learn.
I trust
over
you.
time.
That's yes.
And so he was slower than the rest. Others scooted. So I said, okay, I singled out this guy, chased him, finally cornered him because it was like a grove, lantana bushes all around. There was nowhere he could run. And so he turned around very menacingly and he had a machete in his hand. So he lifted the machete and looked at me. A lot of thoughts were going on in my head at this point of time. I had this guy cornered. He had a weapon in his hand. I did not have one. Adrenaline can help you become highly intelligent at the most critical of times. I had a rangefinder, a rectangular tool with two eyepieces that you look through for measuring distances. And it can be mistaken for a weapon. So I pulled it out of my side pocket and pointed it at him. And I said, if you don't drop that machete, I'm going to shoot you now. And I don't know why I said that. He dropped the machete, got down on the floor, and then me and my tribal assistant pounced on him, wrestled him to the ground, tied him up with the strap that I had for my notebook bag, took away his machete, and then walked him back to the road. Of course, it took me a while. I was panting, and you know how the adrenaline all gets to your head. So,
and this is a story you clearly went home and told your parents about.
I can't remember if I've told them this. I hope they don't listen to the show. Yeah, I think they don't know a lot of things that I did. It's to keep them safe and to prevent them from worrying too much. It's really in their interest. And of course, we had to walk this guy back. Now we had this captive. So I'd done like a citizen's arrest. So I walked him back to the main road. Suddenly the skies opened. It was pouring, cats and dogs. It was raining. So we hailed down a bus, had to take this guy back to the forest office, handed him over there. And of course, they were very grateful. They did all the paperwork. They arrested him. Then through gathering information from him, they were able to go back to that village, arrest the mafia who was involved in that whole timber incident, and they recovered all of that timber. They arrested a whole bunch of people, and they were able to penalize them, take them to court, and punish them for that. But that did not get me any appreciation from my team. They were upset. They were like, your data was impacted. I said, I can go back and collect more data. But this, people disturbing the forests and wildlife in there is definitely going to skew your data. So I'm happy to just scratch this off and redo it again.
In pursuing his objectives, Kartick Satyanarayan is in possession of, I think it's now safe to say, a certain doggedness. The whole point of data collection, he emphasized to me, is not the numbers. It's the conservation work that relies on those numbers. The initial disapproval that was expressed by his data collection team sparked a realization in Kartick.
If you do not understand that important component of protection and conservation of nature and biodiversity and wildlife and trees and plants, then I think we're missing the wood for the trees, literally speaking.
Wildlife SOS ramped up with an initiative to rescue a specific bear species not found anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. I mentioned sloth bears earlier for a reason, and that reason is Kartick's renown as the bear man of India. But we actually need a little bit more context here now. How this particular conservation story unfolds has a very important connection to the story we just heard about timber thieves. It all goes to the dire socioeconomic situation of so many people who are engaged in India in illegal activities. One might argue that the timber thief whom Kartick and his associate apprehended was just trying to make a living. Similarly, the illegal abuse of captive sloth bears, a practice that Kartick helped bring to an end, is situated in the classic tension between human needs and the ethical treatment of animals. Until meeting Kartick, I had never heard about sloth bears in India having been maltreated as so-called dancing bears. Tortured is more apt. Back in the mid-90s, just after Kartick's 3-year assignment collecting forest data for the New York Zoological Society, a distant relative of his, named Geeta Seshmani, asked him this question.
Have you seen this really bizarre practice of dancing bears? I said, I've heard of it, but I haven't dwelt much into it because I've been out in the woods working in the jungle for the last 3 years or so. So she said, this is a very alarming practice. I'd like you to assist me if you can. I mean, can we get more involved in this?
Geeta had started working in wildlife rescue way back in 1979. Now, with support from the organization that employed her, Geeta and Kartick started working together to address the dancing bear problem. A tortured bear, of course, isn't really dancing at all, as Kartick will explain. Geeta and Kartick investigated this gruesome practice in northern India, and I need to warn you that this next bit involves some disturbing descriptions.
My initial work on verifying some of these really shocked me when I saw what a dancing bear was. We visited these villages just outside of Delhi initially. This was a nomadic community, a gypsy community called the Kalandars. They had entered India as 4 brothers with their families 400 years ago from Persia. And they used their bears and their monkeys to entertain the harem of the Mughal emperors back in the day. But, today it had become, in the 21st century, it had just become a roadside entertainment for tourists. So they would stop tourist buses, get them to take photos, and then extort money from them, and that was it. And these people had these bears staked out outside their house like dogs or goats or buffaloes. India has one of the most progressive laws in the world, the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. The sloth bear enjoyed the privilege of a high level of protection. And sloth bears are highly endangered. They are only found in the Indian subcontinent with a subspecies in Sri Lanka. But these bears were on the streets performing, jumping up and down. When I looked at this bear, I saw this horribly thick, crusted rope going down from between its eyes into its nostril, and then the rope coming out of it. And this rope was clearly crusted with pus and blood and all kinds of guck. And the bear's teeth had been damaged. The claws were chopped off, and the bear was basically jumping up and down in fear. And the man had a stick. He would beat the bear, and the bear would hop up and down to avoid getting beaten. People looked at this and said, "Oh, the bear is dancing." And I was like, "No, that bear is not dancing. That bear is frightened. It's terrified. It's hopping up and down in pain. How can you imagine this is dancing?" So this is when Geeta and I launched into a 2.5-year study from 1995 to 1997. We did this research study to find out everything to do with sloth bears, because the community said, "Oh, we just breed them in our backyards." And we said, no wild animal worth its salt would be in a position to breed when it's going through so much of distress and trauma. And so we started going to the community, understanding what these people did. We found out that they were actively poaching and buying cubs from the forest. So mother bears were being killed in the forest, the cubs were being removed from there, and then they were sold in these underground markets where these Kalandar community people would go there and buy these cubs.
Was that difficult to discover, to figure out what was going on there?
It was extremely difficult and excruciatingly painful to find out, because we had to go undercover. Geeta and I had to pretend we were buyers. We were interested in buying cubs for a circus. We had to dress up very differently. We had to travel with these people for months and months on trains, live on platforms, go to these little dwellings by the forest to find out what the truth was. And what we discovered was horrifying.
Was there ever a time when you thought that somebody would blow your cover, that you would be found out for being an imposter?
Yes, absolutely. People over there are suspicious. They know they're breaking the law. They're constantly scared that somebody would trip them up. So they're watching out for any mistakes that you do. And so you have to be very careful and you have to walk the talk. We had witnessed by then how these cubs were treated. They would catch these cubs, 4 men would hold a baby bear down, and then they would take a metal rod and smash out its teeth. And this baby bear is screeching and yowling and crying like a little baby, right? Like a human baby. And then they would take a metal poker, like a long metal poker, make it red hot, and then put it through the muzzle, make a hole through it, and then put this very thick rope, thrust it through that, and then they would not let that wound heal. And of course, you can imagine the screeching and the pain that the cub would be put through. And then every day that cub would be yanked with that rope, and then they would use sticks to kind of beat it on its legs so that it would learn how to stand up on its hind legs and jump up and down. So it was a torturous process for that cub, and then that bear lived the next few years of its life in absolute pain and trauma.
I'm trying to imagine you witnessing this and then trying to sleep at night.
Not only was it impossible to sleep at night, it was also very hard for me to watch it. I had to kind of grit my teeth. I was scared I would show some emotion on my face. When you go undercover, you cannot let your emotions or the look on your face or your expressions blow your cover. I would have let down not just myself, I would have let down our effort.
Ultimately, Geeta and Kartick included their intel, gathered over 2 years, in a report to the Indian government.
It took the lid off this really horrible secret that was going on.
So this really is the genesis of Wildlife SOS. The fledgling organization was charged with stopping the practice. The government was willing to donate land to build a facility for the rehabilitation of the bears. But Kartick and Geeta knew that the problem called for a much more comprehensive approach than just shutting down the practice and punishing the practitioners. People needed help out of this situation as much as the animals did. Of course, there would be no easy solution. It took 17 long years to eradicate the abuse of sloth bears, and the coordination of several organizations: International Animal Rescue, One Voice, Free the Bears, and others. Here's how Kartick and Geeta got the rescue effort off the ground.
First, we gathered this intelligence. found out what was going on. Then we worked with the community. We went back and we said, listen, we want to help you guys. You don't have toilets. You don't have drinking water. You have no place to stay. You have no support for your family. You beg on the streets with this bear. Your kids don't go to school. I mean, these were the problems that we saw in the community. There was 100% illiteracy. They had no education at all. They wouldn't send their children to school. They would send them off to beg on the streets with a bear, with an uncle or an older brother. And we said, we've got to address these issues. So it was a very patriarchal society. The men didn't want anything to do with us. They were like, we don't know why you're here to take our livelihood away. Get out. And they would chase us out with axes and swords and machetes. We'd have to run out and jump in a jeep and drive off, find another headman of a different village who would come back and endorse our genuine interest in helping the community. So we started by giving them drinking water. They had no drinking water. We gave them a little pump. It was $300 back then. It was a lot of money for us, 30 years ago. They'd never seen a pump in their village. And they said, wow, we are very grateful. Thank you for giving us drinking water. Because they had to walk 5 miles to bring a pot of water on their heads. The women would all do this. And then we said, well, we'd like the women here to become a second income earner, because they were all complaining to us that the men would dance the bear, bring back money, drink it up.
Encouraging the Kalandars to give up alcohol altogether was an important part of this campaign.
They also had child marriage, in their communities. At the age of 8 and 10, girls would be married off. And so it was a bad quality of life for them. So we addressed these issues by helping the community send their kids to school. We sent over 11,600 children to school. We paid for their school fees. To be honest, I don't know how we found the money, but the universe just helped us,
So the way I'm hearing the story is that you saw the initial problem is cruelty to animals over here, but that opened the door to a host of other social and economic woes.
Correct. We realized that it was inseparable. We could not help the animals without helping the people. And we realized that those two components were intermeshed so deeply that we had to first try and get them to understand that they could have a better quality of life, social upliftment, if they would leave the bears alone.
Maybe your training in commerce and business management came into play in this whole story, because did you not help establish different types of businesses or livelihoods for these people in these communities?
Exactly. And I was thrilled that I had my business management background to lean upon, because that helped me realize that the only way we could help these community people find alternative livelihoods was to help them with small enterprises. So we found seed funding for them, did a needs assessment, found out what they were good at, and they were all willing to give it up if they had a better quality of life.
What type of enterprises did they engage in then?
Small independent enterprises, like a small store, like a village store for grocery. Welding enterprises like welding fabrication units. We would get them the seed funds to get a welding shop, rent it out, electric connection, a welding unit, generator rental for weddings. That was a big thing. We taught them driving, got them little auto rickshaws or tuk-tuks as you call them, 3-wheeler public transport mechanisms. And they were earning 6 times more using these methods, alternative methods of livelihood, than depending on dancing bears. And that was a game changer. It took one man to voluntarily surrender his bear when we asked him, and we gave him the alternative livelihood option. He took it. And a week later, there was a long line of people wanting to surrender the bears peacefully, willingly, and we combined this with education. So we said, we'd only do this if you will send all your kids to school, girls and boys. And then we started sending all of them to school. We paid for their school fees. And then we also worked with the women. So we addressed the livelihoods of about 3,000 families while doing this. And we got the women in different enterprises. We taught them candle making, embroidery, carpet weaving. They make beautiful bags. And there's a host of things that they now produce. We started buying everything from them. Some of it would not sell because, it took them a while to learn how to do it the right way with the right color combinations. But we would buy it to encourage them. And today we have multiple enterprises and training centers where the women now earn as much as the men do.
The Sloth Bear Rescue Project was the first success from the early days of Wildlife SOS, which today has branched out to help all kinds of wild animals especially in areas where human communities are expanding into places that were once wilderness. The two co-founders, Kartick and Geeta, are still at the helm of the organization today, some 29 years later.
When we brought the dancing bear trade to an end, we were surprised. We thought it would take us 50 years, but we were able to do it in 17 years or so, and we were taken aback. But, success is a very dangerous thing. It makes you super confident that you can conquer anything and nothing is impossible. So since we were successful with this, we said, well, we've got more time on this planet. Let's take on other challenges.
With India's urban populations in modern times growing explosively, sprawl has increasingly posed an existential threat for all kinds of wildlife. Humans and animals vie for the same space, and that prompts people to reach out to Wildlife SOS for help dealing with animals that are just trying to live their lives amid new landscapes of concrete, steel, and pavement. This, of course, isn't just India's problem. It's a global tragedy of wild habitat fragmentation or total disappearance. So Wildlife SOS rescues are classic cases of wild animals being displaced, effectively being run out of their homes.
In big cities like Delhi, Bangalore, etc., these are all villages that became towns and then mushroomed into cities. So there's a lot of biodiversity, and we would get calls about snakes in 14th floor apartments and bats in people's houses, civets. They're like a skunk in people's garages, and we often would also hear about leopards and crocodiles in people's bedrooms and stuff like that. And so we started addressing these issues. We realized that there was a desperate need to establish hotlines, wildlife hotlines, because the police, they had too much on their hands. The forest department was primarily a forestry management organization.
Wildlife SOS could provide something different, an intervention team specializing in work with animals. Working, as we've seen, with government agencies and communities, they advocate for wildlife and their habitats. Here's Kartick describing the kinds of work they have done over the years.
We would often get calls between 1 a.m. and 4 in the morning, and our team would have to kind of scramble immediately, find out the address, get there, find the animal, depending on what it is. Each one requires a different kind of handling.
Once the offending animal is retrieved, it needs to be released into the wild or rehabilitated in a special facility.
We have over 51 projects on the ground, 15 facilities for birds, monkeys, leopards, tigers, elephants, bears. And in bears alone, we have 7 facilities for sloth bears, brown bears, and black bears.
At the Delhi International Airport alone, they employ 30 people to catch wildlife.
Whether it's a porcupine, an antelope, or a large python, and move it from the runway and then put it back in the forest in a safe area.
This is going to take a huge staff.
Yes, we unfortunately employ a little less than 500 people across India. So it's become a large enterprise, and it does worry me. We have to raise, nearly $5 million every year to keep all of this going. So yeah, sometimes I'm tempted to go rob a bank or print some money, but I don't want to be in jail. So I keep away from that idea.
What percentage of animals are you able to rehabilitate out in the wild versus animals that you rescue but will have to be cared for the remainder of their days?
It's hard to put a number on this because it's on a case-to-case basis entirely. If it's an animal that has not been imprinted by people, if it can survive in the wild and is fit for release, then that's the first thing we always do. So we do release a lot of animals back in the wild. But for example, if it was a leopard cub that was orphaned, mother was killed in a road accident or fell into a well and drowned, she wouldn't be able to survive on her own. Similarly, with elephant calves who've been separated from their herd, if you cannot get the calf back to the herd, then it's a hard decision. Some of these animals remain with you and have to be in lifetime care. But if the animal is an adult or can be reunited, so we have done over 100 reunions of leopard cubs that have been separated from their mothers because farmers found them in a field. So we take the cub back, record the call, play it back, use the urine of the cub to kind of smear it around that area, attract that mother back to that same area, and watch it with remote cameras. and the mother comes back and takes that cub. Just go to the Wildlife SOS YouTube link or wildlifesos.org. You can see tons of these videos of how we're able to put these cubs back. With leopard cubs, maybe we have a 95% chance of putting them back. But with other animals which come to us with paw missing, a tiger with which has been in a jaw trap, which was put there by poachers, such animals would not survive in the wild. And they could potentially become also man-eaters or dangerous to people. So then those animals end up having to live in a captivity for the rest of their lives. But they become education animals. They become a conservation study opportunity.
I can't quite imagine living in India. Here in the States, for instance, I've never needed a hotline for reporting roaming tigers or leopards. I bet you haven't either. In just a moment, as our conversation with Kartick Satyanarayan continues, we'll hear him describe his unforgettable personal encounter with one such large cat. He wasn't able to preserve this particular creature's life, but at least he came away with his own. I'm Marcus Smith, and you're listening to Constant Wonder.
On this hotline, we received this call one evening saying there is a tiger in Delhi city. I was laughing. I was cracking up. I mean, this is like having an elephant in New York. I said, no, there really is a tiger. I said, come on, be serious. What are you saying? This was from the local enforcement agency. I said, okay, can we speak to the person who's seen it? And I usually try that method because it helps eliminate crosstalk and mixed messages. And so they finally made this guy call us. So I asked this guy, what did you see? What happened? He said, oh, there was this big cat-like animal. It was the size of a buffalo. It was long. I said, that sounds like no animal I've ever seen or heard of. I said, did it have any markings on it? What color was it? He said, oh, it was yellow with stripes on one side and rosettes on the other. I said, I mean, this is something from a fairy tale. Clearly, you haven't seen anything. So he said, no, there was something, but, it was dark. I didn't see it too well. It injured someone. I said, all right, fine, we'll come take a look. So I went there with a flashlight and a little dog-catching pole, thinking it's probably a civet because civets have these stripes on the tail and they have spots on their body. So I thought, okay, maybe this is this person who didn't pay attention much. He saw some stripes, he saw some spots, assumed that it was on two different sides. And so we got to this furniture workshop, and it was strange because when I got there were like 5,000 people around. People have a lot of time in India for public spectacles. Everybody gives up everything and they suddenly get a lot of free time. It took us a while to wade through that. There were like 20 cop cars. Okay, this looks serious. Let's get in and find out what's going on. So we went into this workshop. There was a long corridor. At the end of the corridor was a room where they had their generator and they had some large canisters of fuel stored in there. I had a couple of forestry guys, my veterinarian, another team member. So we all just walked down casually to this doorway, put on my flashlight. I saw a tail with stripes on it. It was also very stained with grease because there was a greasy room in there, with lots of oil and grease. I said, oh, that does not look like a civet. It looks larger than a civet. And this leopard jumps out at us. People are screaming. There were like 5 or 6 of us. And I got injured on the side because it just kind of swiped and ran back into that same room. It's not a tiger, definitely, but it's a leopard. Now, what strategy do we use to contain this leopard? Step 1, contain the leopard. Step 2, tranquilize it. Step 3, take it away. Make sure the mob is controlled while you're doing all these steps. This is what was going through my head. I mean, all we had to do was shut the door and the animal was contained. But the door was held ajar with this huge canister of engine oil. You would need 4 people to move that away and then shut the door, and that was not going to be possible. You were right next to the leopard.
Kartick retreated into the main furniture workshop, thinking they might well have an extra door lying around, as this one did, and the door was the right size. So the employees attached a handle to it for better carrying, cut a hole in it through which to dart the leopard. The plan was just to move it off to a zoo or out to the wild somewhere. Now don't forget, this was a cornered leopard, and it had already swiped once at Kartick, so it was likely to attack again.
They're not very large. They're small, like mountain lions, right? They're small, agile, but they're also perfect killing machines. They don't target humans so much. We're technically not on their menu card. But when they're cornered, they typically jump onto you. They use their front paws and they have really sharp, large talons. And they sink into your shoulders. And then they use the hind legs and they lift up the hind legs and basically scratch out your stomach. And I had seen some images of people who had died of septicemia because of course they died from septicemia, right? I didn't want that happening to me or any of the people with me on this thing. I was like, okay, how do we protect ourselves over here now? But there was no equipment. We didn't go prepared. We didn't know it was going to be a leopard. Of course, things have changed since then. We are better prepared now when we go there. And the only thing we could find was police helmets. So we got a helmet. And you know these mob charge shields, the fiberglass shields that the police use? You use that to stop people from attacking you. So we had 2 of those. So we decided, okay, only 2 people could go because there was only 2. And so we wore it in front of us like a shield. So you could choose to protect either your front or your back. You couldn't protect both. So I said, okay, fine, I'll choose my front for now. And if I get clawed in my back, the doctors can still work on me, and fix it. My rib cage will protect me over there. What I did notice as I got in that corridor was behind me, I saw 2 policemen get on top of the wall. Now this long corridor had a 7-foot high wall back behind us, and that was about maybe 30, 40 meters away. It was a long corridor. And they sat on top of it, and they had automatic weapons. And I looked up at them and I said, listen, guys, you don't need to be there. We're going to tranquilize the leopard, and hopefully we shut the door, it gets tranquilized, it doesn't come out, and you don't have to worry. And it makes me uncomfortable that you have these weapons in your hands, They don't want it accidentally going off and shooting us. And they said, oh, no, the issue is that we'll stay here in case it gets out. I said, why don't you wait outside? If it jumps out, I know you have to maybe destroy it to protect for public safety. Go ahead and do that. But do not sit on the wall. It's not a wise thing. And I said, do you have your safety catches on your weapons? They said, yeah, safety catches fine. Don't worry, we won't be shooting. Idea is to just sit and observe. Sometimes you get this funny feeling, right? You get this instinct like, okay, this is going to be bad. It's not going to work out. Something is going to go sideways. And that's exactly the feeling I got. But I kind of overruled it and I said, okay, this is important. It was already dark. We had to get done and get out of there. So fine. And I started walking with this door in my hand. It wasn't a very heavy door with a handle. My heart was beating in my head. You had this leopard here. I had this funny feeling about the policeman back there sitting on the wall. And I had this veterinarian ready with the tranquilizer dart all loaded up. And so we walked slowly up to the doorway. All I had to do was move the door forward and seal the space. And it would have taken me another 5 seconds to do that. But before I could do that, this leopard comes right into the doorway, looking at us. It was a small leopard, young, male, handsome, looked up at us. I nudged the vet. I said, shoot, quickly, because we don't want him getting out. And so he shot the dart into the thigh, which is the best place to shoot the injection. Now, when you shoot a tranquilizer dart, you have to give the animal a few minutes, because if the animal's already excited and it's stressed with lots of people screeching, screaming around there, it takes longer for the animal to go down, for the anesthesia to take impact. Unfortunately, it got startled by that dart and leapt effortlessly over me, over my head. I turned around and I see this leopard running helter-skelter towards the wall. And my immediate thought was, what are those 2 cops going to do up there? I look up at them. They were panicking. And next thing I see is these flashes of light coming from their weapons in their hand. And I see this leopard turn around and come running back towards me. I'm like, oh my God, my back is not protected. So I turned the door around to protect myself and my colleague with the veterinarian with the dart gun. And then I hear this, this is all I'm hearing. And I hear these bullets ricocheting off the wall around me. This is all I'm hearing. I doubt we'll make it out of this alive. And all this happened in seconds, of course. And before I could say Jack Robinson, the leopard shot right past me behind, back in the room. I was screaming at these guys, telling them to stop shooting. And I was about to turn around. At the same time, I feel this thunk in my leg, just above my right knee, and my leg stops moving, and I get this damp feeling from just above my knee, and I feel this wetness oozing down all the way down to my ankle. I'm like, why is my leg not moving? Then I realized I'd been shot. These guys were shooting in front of me. There was a leopard behind me. It was probably the worst day of my life.
Oh, I'm sure it
at
was.
this point of time. Finally, those guys realized that, this was out of hand. They stopped shooting. And I was just kind of turned around and pushed that door. It kind of landed on that doorway. And at this point of time, I needed two people to kind of help me because his leg stopped working completely. Of course, it was very embarrassing. And the worst part was I was really cross because that was my favorite pair of jeans. And they had put a hole through that. The police were very embarrassed. They bundled me into a jeep, took me off to hospital. And of course, all my thoughts were, what's going to happen, with that leopard, etc. Got to the hospital. They took me to the emergency room. And then the nurse, just before taking me in for x-rays, used a large pair of scissors and sheared right through my jeans. And that was like, double whammy. I mean, they ruined my jeans completely. So I was pretty cross. And then they took 3 x-rays to make sure the bullet was not there. It had missed my bone by like 3 millimeters. And I preserved the jeans just to remind me of how stupidity can mess up, can mess up a lot of things. And of course, it took me a month to recover from that. And I have a pretty nasty scar also out there. But it showed me how you have to manage wildlife rescue situations with a lot of finesse, with a lot of attention to detail, and be very, very prepared.
If you were to talk about your satisfaction in this line of work, with all of its adventure, all of its pragmatic solutions, and all of its difficult scenarios, if you were to kind of summarize the rewards for you personally, all of this activity.
I would summarize all of it and say that if I drop dead this minute, I would feel I have fulfilled my life to its absolute core. I have been able to give back. I feel I have been able to achieve the purpose for which I was put on this planet, and enjoyed the fruits of nature, of a completely fulfilled life, and a very rewarding one at that. Not only have I been able to help people, communities, the underprivileged, everything from little critters, snakes, birds, leopards, tigers, elephants, trees, plants. I am leaving this planet a much better place than how I found it. I know there are challenges that's going on around the world with that, but globally, on a global perspective and a larger scale, I feel very, very fulfilled, very satisfied, and happy. I feel guilty calling my occupation work. I feel guilty calling it work because I enjoy it so much.
The connection between involvement in the natural world, the physical world, and what people will often describe as spiritual. Any thoughts about how this hands-on work might have repercussions in other aspects of our lives that are deeply meaningful, profound, spiritual?
Absolutely. I come from a spiritual background. In my country, and in my culture, the Hindu culture, we believe in rebirth, we believe in karma, we believe in destiny. You reap what you sow. So if you plant corn seeds, you're not going to get wheat. You are going to get only corn. And so if you plant seeds of kindness and you help out people or animals with random acts of kindness, it always comes back and pays back many, many fold. And even if it doesn't, I believe in doing that on a daily basis. Everything I do, I always think about helping people out. And I think karmically, if you do something good, it will only reward you with something 10 times more.
Kartick Satyanarayan is the co-founder and current CEO of Wildlife SOS. This episode was produced by Tenery Taylor with help from Audrey Hughes, sound designed by Josh Fouts and Brandon Lewis. I'm Marcus Smith. If you like what you're hearing on Constant Wonder, please leave us a 5-star rating or a favorable review on your favorite podcast platform. Your endorsement helps get the word out. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.